Sometimes, especially in politics, it seems like nothing almost can happen sometimes. I mean, last week in terms of politics seems almost like an absolute blur of things that just happened and went by. But actually, last week in particular was actually sort of quite a good week for Labour. There were six major things that went into action this week that are genuine wins for this government. And there are some sectors that aren't going to talk about that. That's fine. That's their prerogative if they don't want to talk about it. But these are some of the things that I think sometimes you should mention. You should mention when you have a win. You know, it annoys me, especially the fact that, for example, the comms that Labour have do and don't mention this sometimes, or then they don't tell MPs how to communicate some of this stuff. And I think that is one of the biggest breakdowns I think we've had, that communication has sort of been centralized, that MPs and their voices do and don't get out because they're not told how to communicate this stuff, what the talking points of the day are, what stuff, you should be talking about, celebrate that we brought this in. It's frustrating sometimes on a lot of levels when you don't see that, especially from someone like, say, when I see it from someone like me who works in that field of marketing and communications. Highly frustrating. But I want to go over you 6 wins that Labour actually had this week that actually are going to make a lot of big differences, and I think are going to be quite good for the country. So before we do get into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button down below. There are links to my Patreon page, the one donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on then into what these 6 Labour wins are this week. So the first one might not seem like too much, but it is something that has been needed, I think, to be done for quite a while. They've had a crackdown on mass scam texts. So they are banning SIM farms. This is what criminals would use to send out mass text scams to thousands of people at once. And here's the other kicker for this. We are actually the first country in Europe to do this. Smart move. Bans devices. Criminals obviously are still going to use this, but now that this is banned, that means that police can take action. It means, action can be taken. Where previously, if you got one of these spam texts, the police weren't really interested, or until, well, you might have been defrauded by that particular, should we say, text message if you happen to accidentally click on the link, etc., etc. But I think doing this is good. It's a sensible move, allowing police to act when these types of devices are set up. And they are actually quite traceable sometimes as well. So this would be very, very good. The other big thing that doesn't actually get quite talked about enough is, of course, driving tests. Something that had never got really brought up, but there has been a massive driving test backlog. So a lot of these new measures that they've brought in this week are going to enable over 10,000 extra tests a month to be taken. And some of these things that they've done include now a crackdown on, for example, test buying bots. So a driving company, for example, or should we say a big driving school would set up one of these bots, and they would just buy driving tests. Didn't even matter if the pupil wasn't going to go to it. They would just buy that test so that they would have a guaranteed spot for one of their pupils if they needed it. That is now on that. They are now cracking down on that. They are also doubling permanent number of trainers to be able to accommodate for this. They're also asking DVSL SLA staff in other roles to now conduct tests. So there's now a lot more capacity to have people take those tests. Like I say, it's allowing 10,000 extra tests a month. That is how you tackle a backlog on that. The third one is, of course, the free breakfast club rollout. And I would say this was easily the biggest win, I would say, of last week, because these free breakfast clubs are good. It makes sense. It's good economics. It's good for kids. It's good for families. Lots of information out there about how good these types of breakfast clubs are. And yet a lot of people poo-poo them. They go, oh, free breakfast club. They just, you know, oh, what a, quote, wonderful idea. But it is a good idea. It is good that these things happen. So they've started these in over 750 schools. That would cover about 180,000 children, and parents in particular save up to £450 per year on childcare because you have these types of initiatives. How can you not tell me free breakfast clubs are not good? Not only that, we've seen, for example, improves education outcomes for kids. It helps them socialize. It's all good all around. The other thing that also came into effect this week was prison sentences for polluting water bosses. Yes, the Water Special Measures Act has now come into force. This means that water company bosses who try to cover up spills or sewage, which they have been doing, now get locked up. I wonder who the first one will be. We'll see. I'll keep you informed. I'll keep an eye on that if anything happens on that. Another thing that happened this week was the £300 million, the clean energy funding has now been fast-tracked. And this is being targeted especially to invest in supply chains for domestic offshore wind. And as we've seen very recently, if you saw my video about America and the problem they're having with those China tariffs and the wave of Liberation Day that's about to hit you, supply chains very, very important. So it is very, very good to see that if you want to achieve net zero, it's not just the case of building offshore wind farms. It's you've got to build the equipment. And then, of course, how does that stuff get to where it needs to go in order to be built? Investing in supply chains, in the logistics, is a really good step that is going to be very, very good for the future. And not only that, it is potentially going to create a lot of jobs. There's also, and I know people have very different feelings, but there's two big carbon capture projects now being set up in Wales, I think it is, and England. This is going to create over 2,000 jobs. Now, that's good. These are the types of jobs for the industries we want to see happening in the future. So, 2,000 jobs might not sound a lot, but hey, it's a start. And it's a lead into something much better, which we've seen Ed Miliband really want to push for. And then the final one, of course, this week is they've pushed now for harsher fines on platform hosting knife crime content. So they are now going to fine social media companies £60,000 if they do not remove this type of content within 48 hours of a police warning. And then on top of that, it is going to be 10,000 pounds, £1,000 for the individual executives every day that content is not removed. Like I say, this type of content on social media platforms should be removed. We've talked before about the lack inactivity of social media platforms not removing harmful content like this. It's a win. And I'm sure people will disagree and say, oh, but what about this? What about this? Well, what about these wins? Governments do good and bad things at the same time. Like it or not, that's just how governments are. And as I said before, hey, this government's not perfect, but it's damn better than the previous government we had. That's for sure, for the past 14 years. So, as always, let me know what you think to some of these things down below. And of course, we'll see you all next time.